Okay, folks, so when I say story time, you say shh. All right, so story time, shh. Story time, shh. Story time, shh. How's it going, folks? It's Pat here from Asphalt Green's Recess Enhancement Program. I'm here with another instructional video for you, this time for our game, Storytellers. Before we hop into the overview of the game, though, we're going to start off the way we always do, and that is with the safety check. So, before we start any game and after we finish any game, we always want to make sure that we and our students are washing our hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. We also want to make sure that at no point during the game, before the game, or after the game is anybody putting their hands anywhere near their faces. We also want to make sure that if anybody has to cough or sneeze, they're doing the greatest motion known to humankind, which is the dab. All right, so they're just coughing or sneezing into their elbow. And we always want to make sure that at all times during the game, before the game, and after the game, that everyone is remaining at least 6 feet apart so that everyone is properly social distanced. Once everybody has done that, though, and you feel comfortable moving on, just give me 2 dabs, and we'll get started on the game. Seems like everyone's ready to go. So as mentioned, the name of the game is Storytellers. What's the name of the game? No, you don't have to grab a book. It's fine. You don't have to tell me a story. It's totally cool. That's right. The name of the game is Storytellers. Now, this is a great game for students in kindergarten up through 5th grade, or students within that age range or ability level range. As to where the game can be played, well, this is a circle game. So long as your space allows for the formation of a circle and it keeps students 6 feet apart from one another, well, you'll be good to go, all right? That could be in an auditorium, could be a playground, it could even be a hallway, depending on the size of the hallway and the group of students you have, okay? In regards to equipment, you won't need any equipment for this game other than some cones or tape that you might lay out for boundaries. So we have safety covered, okay? Students won't be sharing any of the same items, and students will be properly social distanced at all times, all right? And I always like to think that fun is a byproduct of safety, so we're going to have a blast while playing it. Add on that it's a rep game, and you can just guarantee that everyone is going to have so much fun. But let's get into the details of the game so I can really show you why it's going to be such a great time, okay? And as we always like to do whenever we go into the details of a game, we're going to rep it out. So we'll start with R, ready, talk a little bit about how we can get ready for Storytellers. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do in order to get ready for Storytellers is map out your play area and designate your boundaries. As mentioned, this is a circle game, so find yourself a space that allows for students to form a circle while still remaining 6 feet apart from every other student, okay? Once you found that space, you can visually mark off where you want the boundaries for your play area to be, okay? And you can just have a think about where you're going to place the cones and the tape. Once you've finished mapping out the play area, you can do a safety sweep of that area. So you can remove any items that might pose a safety risk to you or your students, and you can have a think about how you're going to work around any items that maybe can't be moved. Once you feel comfortable with the safety of the space, you can then lay out the equipment. So you can lay out the cones or the tape just to mark off the boundaries, but as mentioned, you won't need anything else. Once you feel comfortable with your play space, you're like, wow, everything looks great, can't wait to get started. Well, that's when you can gather up all of the students so you can get started. You can have students circle up, but to grab their attention, you can use the attention grabber that I used at the beginning of this video, okay? So when I say story time, you say shh, okay? So story time, shh, story time, shh, story time, shh. All right, can I have everyone form a circle within the boundaries and make sure you're staying 6 feet apart from everyone else? Now that you have all of your students gathered up, you're ready to move on to the E portion of the rep model, explain. Now, when explaining a game, it's always important to use a loud and clear voice. That way, all students can hear and understand you. You also want to make sure that you're asking students specific questions about the instructions you're giving while you're giving them. That way, you can check for understanding and clarify anything that maybe you weren't super clear on the first time. A few questions we would suggest you ask for this game are, Well, what happens if you can't think of a word? Or how many words are you adding to the story when it's your turn? Now those questions will make a little bit more sense as we talk through the actual instructions for the game. So how about I do that right now and you follow along on your PDF copy of those instructions that you found on our website. So the first rule of Storytellers is something you'll already have students doing, and that is to circle up and stand 6 feet apart from one another while doing so. Once students have circled up though, you can explain to them that they are all storytellers and that they're going to be coming up with a story as a group. You can then designate one student to be the storyteller leader for the first round. You can explain that that storyteller leader is going to say one word to start off the story. So it could be the, could be could be one, whatever, you know? And then what will happen is once that storyteller leader has said their one word, it will move to the person on the right, and the person on their right will have to say one word that attaches to that first word, okay? And then the person on the right of the person who said the second word will then say one word that attaches to those first two words. And the whole point is to continue this pattern while creating a story, okay? But everybody can only say one word when it's their turn. So, for example, the game might go, one day the bear went to the forest to get some honey, right? So, and the pattern will continue, right, all the way around. But the pattern stops and breaks if someone can't think of a word, okay? So if a student can't think of a word, you can explain to your group of students that they will then do 10 seconds of silly dancing, 10 jumping jacks, 10 squats, whatever, right? And then they will re-enter the game as the new storyteller leader, and they'll start a new story, okay? So the first story will be done, and then they can just jump into a completely new one, all right? And that is Storytellers. So that's an explanation of the rules for Storytellers. So how about now we move on to the final portion of the rep model, P, play. Talk a little bit about how we can play the game so students are abiding by the rules, and how we can play the game to keep it interesting and engaging for students. Before we can do that though, is it story time? Shh, story time? Shh, story time? Shh. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you a story, but can we all gather on up and stand at least 6 feet apart from one another? Brilliant stuff, folks. Thanks for doing that. All right, so a few things we would suggest when you're playing Storytellers. First off, you just want to remind students that the object of the game is to create a cohesive story, okay? You want to just reinforce this because sometimes students might throw in just a completely random word to maybe mess up the person on their right, okay? So the person who has to go next, like maybe they're saying, we went to the woods, and then someone just says spaceship, right? It makes it really hard for the person that has to go after that person who said spaceship to add another word into the story, okay? So you just want to reinforce that the whole object of the game is to come up with a story as a group. It's a teamwork game, okay? You also want to remind students, as with all games, just to make sure that they're staying 6 feet apart from one another at all times, okay? Students might get a little bit excited as the story gets going and start to clump up, so just remind them of that. Something that might also be helpful for you and can help students as well is to put a time limit on the amount of time that students have to think of a word, okay? So maybe it's 10 seconds, maybe it's 5 seconds, whatever it might be. It'll just be helpful for you and for students, okay? Now, if students are like, oh no, this is too boring, like I'm not even having fun anymore, and they're looking for a little bit of something extra, well, you can start to mix it up for them, okay? So maybe at first you started off with adding a sentence rather than adding one word, okay? So rather than adding bear, a student, when it's their turn, can say something like, the bear went into the woods. And the person on their right will then say, when they were in the woods, they found a house, you know? That way, it gives students the opportunity to get a little bit more creative, and it also makes it a little bit tougher for them, right? Now, instead of thinking of just one word, they have to think of a sentence. So there's a chance that they'll not be able to think of that sentence within the time limit, and then they'll have to do 10 jumping jacks, 10 seconds of silly dancing, and I'll just add a new challenge for them. If students are like, no, this is too easy for us, well, maybe you can have it so that students have to balance in place while thinking, okay? So they can just do some form of a balancing motion, just so that it makes it a little bit more difficult for them to think of a sentence or a word. And if students are having, an easy go of that and they're like, we want even more, well, maybe you can have it so that students are running in place while they're trying to think of the words, right? And the only time that they stop running in place is when the story ends, okay? So those are just a few things that we would suggest you add into the game just to keep students interested and engaged in the game, and to help students abide by the rules of the game. But if there's anything else that helps you to make the game more safe, more fun, and more active, please add it in. Those are just some of our tips. So that's the end of our tip list, which means that we're at the end of the rep model and therefore at the end of our video. Before we head on off though, is it story time? Shh, story time. Shh, story time. Shh. Thank you, folks, and don't worry, it's not story time, all right? But I just want to say thank you. Thank you for following along on this video, and I hope you find it useful. And I hope you have a great time playing Storytellers with your students, and we just ask that you stay tuned for more videos coming from us over here at Asphalt Green. We'll catch you the next time, all right?